The courtroom was packed tighter than usual for a Thursday morning. Rows of benches filled with attorneys, reporters, and concerned community members buzzed with whispers. People weren't there for some celebrity trial or high-profile criminal case. No, they were there because of a quiet 9-year-old girl named Emily, who hadn't said a word in almost 3 months. She sat on the witness stand like a porcelain doll, unmoving and unspeaking. Her pale hands gripped the leash of her certified therapy dog, a golden retriever named Max. His calm, honey-colored eyes surveyed the room cautiously. Max lay at her feet, but his ears were upright and alert. It was clear he wasn't just there for comfort. He was on duty. The case involved a custody battle between Emily's mother and her ex-husband Emily's stepfather, Gregory Lane. The stepfather's attorney had requested Emily testify in front of the court, claiming she had no valid reason to stay silent, and that her unwillingness to talk was an act of manipulation influenced by her emotionally unstable mother. No one expected her to speak a lot, but they hoped she'd at least answer simple yes or no questions. Instead, she hadn't uttered a single syllable. Every time someone addressed her, she stared at the table or pet Max's head slowly, as if pretending the rest of the world didn't exist. Judge Ronald Hamilton adjusted his glasses and looked over at Emily. "Emily, I know this is difficult. We're not here to hurt you. You can take your time. Do you remember what I said earlier about telling the truth?" Emily blinked, but gave no response. The judge gave her a reassuring nod. "You don't have to be afraid in here. We're here to help." Her attorney, a woman named Karen Monroe, leaned forward. "Emily, sweetheart, do you want to tell the judge anything? Even a little?" Still nothing. The air in the room felt heavy. Gregory Lane leaned back in his chair, confident. He gave a smirk toward the jury box. His lawyer, a sharply dressed man named Colin Frey, scribbled something down on a yellow notepad. Everything seemed to be going their way. And then it happened. Emily's right hand moved. Barely. She raised 2 fingers and tapped Max twice on the shoulder. The movement was so subtle, most people didn't catch it. But Max did. The dog immediately rose to a sitting position, stiff and alert. His nose pointed straight at Gregory Lane, and a low, steady growl rumbled from his chest. The room hushed. The judge raised his eyebrows, clearly surprised. "Is that normal behavior for the dog?" Karen Monroe turned toward Emily, gently. "Sweetheart, can you show me what you just did?" Emily did it again, 2 fingers, tapped softly against Max's shoulder. Max's growl grew louder. Gasps echoed through the room. Gregory Lane shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath. "It's just a trick." But Judge Hamilton wasn't convinced. "Is that a command she was trained to use?" he asked. Karen's expression darkened slightly. "Your Honor, may I request a brief recess to clarify something with Emily's therapy team?" The judge nodded. "Granted." 15 minutes. Everyone rose as the judge exited. Reporters immediately scrambled outside to place calls. Inside the hallway, Karen pulled Emily aside with the child psychologist, Dr. Melissa Crane, who had worked with Emily since her breakdown. Karen asked, "That signal she just gave, was that something she learned in therapy?" Dr. Crane looked grim. "Yes, that's one of her silent trauma signals. Emily was too scared to speak about what happened at home, so we trained her to use certain hand gestures for safety. That signal she just gave Max means, 'I'm in danger.'" Karen's eyes widened. "And Max's reaction?" "He's trained to recognize that signal as an alert for abuse. He's supposed to react aggressively toward whoever she perceives as a threat." Karen's breath caught in her throat. So she just identified her abuser in front of the entire courtroom without saying a word. Dr. Crane nodded. "Exactly." Inside the courtroom, Judge Hamilton had returned and was reviewing notes with the bailiff. Karen approached the bench, her voice low and serious. "Your Honor, I have crucial information. May I speak privately?" He agreed, and after a short sidebar, the judge leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. Court will resume. In closed session. All non-essential personnel must vacate. No cameras. No reporters. We need to hear from this child without pressure. The courtroom emptied quickly, with murmurs trailing behind the leaving crowd. The reporters outside tried to push for answers, but no one spoke. Inside, Karen, Emily, Judge Hamilton, and Dr. Crane remained, with Max lying at Emily's side once more. The judge's tone was gentler now. "Emily, you don't have to speak if you don't want to. But I'd like to see that signal one more time, just so I understand." Emily, visibly shaking, nodded slightly. Then she raised her fingers and tapped Max. Max leaped to his feet and growled louder, deeper than before. This time, he placed himself between Emily and the judge's bench. The judge recoiled slightly and looked into Emily's eyes. There was something there that hadn't been before. Not fear. Not even sadness. Resolve. Judge Hamilton slowly reached for his phone. "I'm ordering a welfare check and a full search of Mr. Lane's residence," he said, effective immediately. Dr. Crane whispered, "She just told you everything she couldn't say out loud." The judge glanced back at Max, who hadn't taken his eyes off the door the stepfather had exited through. The courtroom, once heavy with doubt and silence, now brimmed with quiet revelation. A girl had spoken, not with words, but with trust, with instinct, and with the one companion who never needed her to speak aloud to understand her truth. And the truth was only just beginning to surface. The courtroom buzzed with confusion and uncertainty as word of the recess spread like wildfire. Most people had no idea what just happened, but those who witnessed the strange interaction between Emily and Max were shaken. A signal from a child, a growl from a dog, and a judge who looked like he had seen a ghost. Emily sat quietly in the smaller consultation room with Max beside her, his warm body pressed against her leg. Dr. Melissa Crane kneeled beside them, speaking in soft tones. "Emily, you did really well. Max knew exactly what to do. We're all proud of you." Emily gave no response, but she rested her hand on Max's head, fingers curling into his fur like she was holding on to a lifeline. "Back in chambers, Judge." Hamilton paced the floor while Karen Monroe explained the hand signal in detail. "Your Honor, Emily was too traumatized to speak. The stepfather's abuse was long-term, psychological, and physical. She was taught to use hand signals to alert Max of danger when she couldn't talk." He stopped pacing. "And the specific gesture she gave in court?" Karen nodded. "It's one we assigned carefully. 2 taps to Max's shoulder means, 'I feel unsafe with someone here.' Max is trained to identify the target. He picked Gregory Lane. Twice." Judge Hamilton exhaled slowly, processing the weight of what had occurred. "Have you seen her give this signal before?" "No," Dr. Crane answered from the doorway. "This is the first time she's used it in a formal setting, which tells us something vital. She didn't feel safe until she was on the record." The judge sat down. His voice was firm now. "We're reopening this case not as a civil custody matter, but as a criminal investigation into abuse. I'll authorize a search of the residence immediately." That night, law enforcement moved quickly. A CPS team, accompanied by a trained K-9 unit, arrived at Gregory Lane's home with a signed warrant in hand. The house was tucked in a quiet, middle-class suburb, indistinguishable from the others on the street. Neighbors peered through curtains, whispering to each other. Inside, the house was clean, almost obsessively so. But something felt off. One of the officers, a veteran of child abuse investigations, noticed there were no family photos of Emily. Anywhere. Not in the living room, not in the hallway, not even in her supposed bedroom. The K-9 sniffed near the basement door, then barked once. Officers exchanged glances and followed. The basement was sparsely furnished. An old couch, a desk, a locked door tucked behind a bookcase. The dog stopped there, pawing at the floor. One officer ran his hand along the bookshelf, eventually finding a switch. The wall shifted with a soft click. Behind it was a hidden room, small, windowless, and freezing. Inside, they found evidence none of them would ever forget. A mattress on the floor with restraints, cameras mounted on corners, files labeled with dates, and dozens of handwritten journals stacked in a milk crate. There were also SD cards and hard drives in a locked drawer. The air in the room turned suffocating. One of the officers backed out, swallowing hard. Back at the courthouse the next morning, Gregory Lane sat in a holding cell, pale and sweating. He no longer had the cocky confidence he carried before. When told of the discovery, he barely blinked. "I want a lawyer," was all he said. The judge reconvened the hearing under emergency protocol. Reporters were kept out. The courtroom was sealed again. A police officer whispered in the judge's ear before taking a seat. Whatever had been discovered, it was bad. Corinne Monroe stepped forward. "Your Honor, I'm submitting photographic evidence from the search. We're requesting that Gregory Lane be remanded into custody without bail pending criminal trial. The evidence points to not just abuse, but intentional concealment of that abuse." Gregory's attorney stood up shakily. "This wasn't part of the original hearing. You're overstepping. Sit down," the judge ordered. "We are well past custody issues. We're discussing the possibility of long-term imprisonment." Emily and Max sat at the edge of the courtroom, separated from the confrontation, but close enough to hear every word. Emily's hands trembled as she held Max's leash. He stayed calm, occasionally licking her hand. She leaned into his warmth like a shield. The judge turned to the bailiff. "Make sure the defendant is taken directly to county lockup. He is not to be released under any circumstances." Gregory was led away in cuffs, his face blank. Not angry, not shocked, just empty. After the session, Judge Hamilton asked to meet privately with Emily again. This time, she entered willingly. Max followed close behind, tail swaying gently. The judge leaned forward. "Emily, I want to thank you. You helped us see something we might have missed. What you did took real courage." She didn't speak, but she gave a small nod. Dr. Crane encouraged her. "It's okay to say something now, if you want." Emily looked down at Max. She bent low and whispered something only he could hear. The dog wagged his tail and licked her cheek. She giggled. Softly, the judge smiled. It was the first time anyone had seen Emily laugh since the case began. He looked at Max. "That dog is more than a companion. He's a guardian." Dr. Crane nodded. "He's her voice when words are too painful." Judge Hamilton tapped his pen against the folder in front of him. "I'll be requesting that. This dog received formal recognition from the state, and I want a full behavioral analysis brought in to testify. That reaction, what he did in court, might be the most honest testimony I've seen in my entire career." Emily raised her hand. Slowly. For a moment, it looked like she might speak again. But she didn't. Instead, she placed her hand on Max's chest. Tap, tap. Max didn't growl this time. He simply leaned his body closer to hers, pressing into her protectively. The signal had changed. She wasn't saying, "I'm in danger." She was saying, "I'm safe now." Judge Hamilton stared at the sealed report that had just landed on his desk. The photographs, the police findings, and the psychological notes painted a picture far darker than he had anticipated. Gregory Lane hadn't just been abusive, he had been methodical, manipulative, and dangerously intelligent. The hidden room, the journals detailing behavior control tactics, and the chilling schedule of punishments left no doubt in anyone's mind. Emily's signal had cracked open a dam holding back a flood of horrors. But what haunted the judge most was the knowledge that if Max hadn't reacted that day, if Emily hadn't signaled, this man might have walked free. That realization weighed heavily on him as he requested a private, off-the-record session with Emily. He wasn't doing it to interrogate her. He needed to understand something beyond the legalities. He wanted to see what no piece of paper could show him. In his private chambers, the room was calm and softly lit. Emily entered quietly with Max by her side. Karen Monroe accompanied her, along with Dr. Crane, who gave her a reassuring nod before stepping aside. Judge Hamilton, wearing a cardigan instead of his black robe, smiled warmly at her. No microphones, no cameras. Just us, he said. You don't have to say a word unless you want to. Emily climbed into a soft leather chair beside Max. The dog instantly settled at her feet, ears twitching with attention. His body was alert, but relaxed, an emotional thermometer reading the room better than any adult could. The judge leaned forward, resting his hands on his knees. Emily, do you remember what you did in court yesterday? She didn't respond. Instead, her fingers found Max's fur again. She stroked his ear gently. Could you show me again? The judge asked, voice softer now. Only if you feel okay doing it. Emily glanced up at Karen, who gave her a gentle nod. Then she raised 2 fingers and tapped Max's shoulder twice. Max's posture changed in an instant. He rose, placed himself directly between Emily and the judge, and released a deep, warning growl. The judge's eyes widened, not in fear, but in awe. That's extraordinary, he said. And he's only reacting to your signal? Dr. Crane confirmed. She doesn't use it lightly. It means, this person hurt me. I feel unsafe. Max responds to that signal as a warning alert. He identifies the perceived threat and defends her accordingly. Max continued his protective stance until Emily reached out and tapped him again, this time on the head, a motion resembling a release command. Max relaxed instantly, returning to her feet and lying down, though his eyes remained locked on the judge. That dog knows exactly what's going on, the judge murmured. He sat back, digesting everything. Dr. Crane added, Emily never once used that signal during months of therapy, never even practiced it outside training. This was her first real use. That tells us everything, Karen chimed in. She didn't just accuse Gregory Lane. She told the truth using the only language she trusted wouldn't be twisted against her. The judge looked at Emily, who still hadn't spoken. Would you mind showing me the other signal? The one that means safe? Emily tilted her head slightly. Then she pressed her palm gently against Max's chest. Max licked her wrist and wagged his tail thumping softly against the rug. The judge smiled. Thank you. That means a lot. She gave the faintest smile. It disappeared as quickly as it came, but it was real. He leaned back and took a deep breath. I've presided over 400 custody cases. I've seen tears, tantrums, and all kinds of manipulation from adults. But I've never seen truth told more clearly than what you and Max did yesterday. Emily didn't react, but Max nuzzled her arm, as if telling her she had done enough. The judge glanced at Karen. How's the public defender reacting? To the arrest? Karen's lips tightened. He's furious. Claimed bias. Accused the court of emotional manipulation using the dog. But the evidence found at the house has sealed it. The moment police found those journals and that hidden room, it became an open and shut case. The judge nodded grimly. The world is going to remember this one. Not because of the crime, unfortunately. There are too many of those. But because of how it was exposed. And who exposed it. He looked at Emily again. You saved yourself, he said. You did it. With courage, with silence, and with the help of the most loyal friend I've ever seen. Karen whispered, You want to tell him something. Sweetheart? Emily paused. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. Instead, she turned to Max. She placed both hands on his face, stared into his eyes, and gave a slight nod. Max responded by placing his paw gently on her lap and resting his head there. Dr. Crane wiped her eyes. That's her way of saying she's ready. She's not afraid anymore. The judge leaned forward again, voice cracking just slightly. Emily, I'd like to honor Max at the next session. A formal commendation for what he did. Would that be okay? Emily finally made eye contact and nodded. For the first time since this case began, her silence didn't feel like a barrier. It felt like strength. A cold silence hung over the courtroom the next morning. The usual chatter and shuffling of paper were gone, replaced by cautious, uneasy quiet. Everyone knew the case had changed. This wasn't about custody anymore. This was a criminal case. Now one that sent shockwaves through the legal community the moment the sealed documents leaked. Gregory Lane entered the courtroom in handcuffs, escorted by 2 sheriff's deputies. His expression was blank, but the tightness in his jaw betrayed a flicker of unease. The press had been banned from the proceedings, but it didn't matter. Everyone in the courthouse already knew what had been found. The prosecution team stood ready. A thick binder sat on their desk, filled with photographs, digital reports, and transcribed journal entries recovered from the hidden room inside. Lane's home. There were images, harrowing, disturbing ones, along with a behavioral map of control methods. Even seasoned officers had trouble looking through the evidence without flinching. Judge Hamilton entered, his robe heavier than usual under the emotional weight of what he now knew. He scanned the courtroom and saw Emily sitting quietly beside Max, her golden retriever service dog. She wore a soft yellow hoodie, her small fingers twisted around Max's collar. Max sat upright, calm but alert, watching the courtroom with quiet vigilance. The judge cleared his throat. This court is reconvened to address criminal charges brought forth against Gregory Lane, formerly the petitioner in the custody case. Evidence submitted last night has triggered an official investigation into child abuse, coercive control, and aggravated assault against a minor. Lane's attorney, Colin Frey, stood quickly. Your Honor, I move to suppress. Denied. Hamilton said, not even letting him finish. The search was executed under emergency judicial order, and the evidence gathered is extensive. If you wish to argue technicalities, you may do so at trial. Today, we're here to determine whether Mr. Lane will remain in custody. Colin sat down hard, his face pale. The lead prosecutor stepped forward. Your Honor, we'd like to present excerpts from the journal found behind the false wall in Mr. Lane's basement. Each entry is time-stamped, handwritten, and contains references to punishments administered to the child in question, Emily Reed. He held up a laminated page. One entry reads, locked her in the dark again tonight. She cried for Max. I took his bed away so he'd stop comforting her. Another, dated just days before the trial began, says, she's stopped talking. Entirely. Good. Silence means I've won. Gasps echoed across the room. Emily didn't react, but Max pressed his head gently into her lap. Karen Monroe placed a calming hand on Emily's shoulder. The child didn't flinch. She simply kept petting Max's ears with steady fingers, her face unreadable. The prosecutor continued, officers also recovered video files from SD cards. We won't display them in court unless required, but we have confirmed their authenticity. The materials show the defendant restraining the minor in a small windowless room. His voice is clearly audible, instructing her to stay silent or face punishment. These were not moments of discipline. These were acts of domination. Judge Hamilton's jaw tightened. Are there signs of injury? Yes, medical assessments. Conducted yesterday revealed evidence of old bruises, healed bone fractures, and stress-related damage consistent with long-term trauma. The child's mutism, confirmed by her therapist, is a psychological response to abuse most likely developed over months, if not years. The room fell silent again. No one dared speak. Lane shifted slightly in his seat, but didn't say a word. Corinne Monroe stood next. Your Honor, I'd like to add a statement on behalf of Emily. She is still not speaking freely, but she has requested that Max remain by her side at all times, both in court and at home. He's her stability, her protector. The judge nodded. Request granted. And he looked at Emily. Do you want Max to stay with you always, sweetheart? Emily looked up. She made direct eye contact with him, then slowly gave the safe signal, pressing her palm to Max's chest. Max wagged his tail and leaned into her. Hamilton smiled gently. Understood. Then he turned his attention back to Lane. Mr. Lane, based on the overwhelming evidence presented, the court finds probable cause for full criminal prosecution. You will remain in county custody without bail. A formal trial date will be set within the week. Until then, any contact with the victim or her mother is strictly prohibited. Lane didn't respond. He merely nodded once, faintly, as if finally realizing the gravity of the situation. As he was led out of the courtroom, Emily finally moved. She turned slightly toward him, not to cry, not to scream, but to raise her hand in the air. And she tapped her shoulder twice. Max growled immediately. Lane's eyes widened in disbelief. It was the same signal. The same one that had brought everything crashing down. The deputies tightened their grip on his arms as he stumbled, losing his composure for the first time. The message was clear. She remembered everything, and she wasn't afraid anymore. After Lane was taken away, the judge called the court into recess. But he lingered behind, watching as Emily walked out of the courtroom with Max beside her. Something about the way she walked upright, shoulders back, felt different now. She was no longer just the silent girl. She was the one who broke the silence. Word of the trial spread quickly. Though the court had sealed the official records, whispers traveled faster than any press release ever could. People who once viewed Gregory Lane as a charismatic neighbor or upstanding community member were now looking at him with disbelief and disgust. The man who used to mow his lawn at 6 a.m. with a wave and a smile was now branded something far darker. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere had changed. It no longer felt like a legal proceeding. It felt like a reckoning. As more evidence surfaced, even the most skeptical eyes turned sympathetic toward Emily, the silent child with the unshakable golden retriever by her side. Emily sat on the bench next to her mother, back straight, hands calmly stroking Max's fur. She still hadn't spoken a full sentence since the trial began, but the courtroom no longer needed her words. Max was enough. His body language alone told the story. When he growled, when he sat up, when he leaned against Emily as she trembled. And today, they brought in an expert to explain exactly what that meant. Dr. Alicia Banner, a renowned canine behavioral specialist, took the stand. She wore a gray suit and spoke with the calm precision of someone used to both science and emotion. Dr. Banner, the prosecutor asked, you've reviewed Max's training records and observed his behavior with Emily in person. Can you tell the court what you've concluded? Yes, she replied, glancing briefly at Emily and Max. This is no ordinary therapy dog. Max has been trained in advanced trauma response. Specifically, he can identify a child's silent distress signals and respond defensively. When Emily taps his shoulder, it is a command that indicates she is feeling threatened or unsafe. And his reaction? His reaction is immediate. He positions himself between the child and the perceived threat and begins low frequency. Growling. If the threat advances, he will escalate with barking or even protective contact. The prosecutor nodded. In your opinion, did Max act appropriately in this courtroom? Dr. Banner smiled softly. He acted perfectly. A moment Emily gave her signal, he identified Gregory Lane as the threat. That was not a trick. It was a trauma response. The jury watched Max closely now. He lay at Emily's feet, calm, but vigilant. Occasionally, his eyes flicked toward the defense table. Each time he did, Gregory Lane looked away. Next, the prosecution brought out the journals again. Today, they focused on a section titled Voice Control. The prosecutor. Read aloud. If she speaks, she wins. Silence means I control the memory. The goal is simple. Keep her quiet and keep the world blind. Murmurs swept through the courtroom. Emily looked down at her shoes, fingers tightening slightly around Max's leash. He nuzzled her leg in response, grounding her again. Corinne. Monroe stood up next. Your Honor, if I may, Emily has requested to share something today. She's not ready to speak, but she's written it herself. The judge nodded solemnly. Proceed. Corinne approached the stand and handed the judge a single sheet of paper. His brow furrowed as he read it silently and aloud. I was always afraid he would hurt Max if I talked. But Max told me it was okay. He didn't use words. He just stayed. He always stayed. Even when I cried in the closet, Max would scratch at the door until I came out. I stayed silent for so long, but Max never left me. He listened even when I couldn't speak. That's why I told him first. The judge paused. His voice was thick with emotion. She told the dog before she told any of us. Corinne whispered, because Max was the only one who never doubted her. The courtroom fell into a thick, poignant silence. No one shuffled, no one whispered. Even the reporters outside, who could only guess at what was happening within the courtroom walls, felt the gravity of the moment as officials quietly passed them word of Emily's handwritten note. Then the defense made their move. Gregory. Lane's lawyer stood, trying to recover ground. Your Honor, we acknowledge the child has been through trauma. But we must also acknowledge the dangers of over-reliance on canine reaction in determining guilt. A dog cannot testify. A growl is not a fact. Corinne Monroe rose swiftly. No, but dozens of video clips are, and journal entries, and bruises, and the child's silence, which only ended when her dog gave her courage. Judge Hamilton turned to Lane's attorney. Mr. Frey, the evidence speaks. The child may have been silent, but her world was screaming. And Max was the one who listened. Lane fidgeted in his chair. For the first time, he looked afraid, not of prison, but of exposure. His secrets were no longer buried behind basement walls. They were out. Witnessed, recorded, believed. The court adjourned for lunch, but no one talked as they left the room. Even the reporters outside stood quietly as they scribbled their notes. This wasn't the kind of story you shouted about. This was the kind you carried with a lump in your throat. Back inside, as the room cleared, Emily stood with Max and gently pressed her palm to his chest. He licked her hand. She whispered one word so faintly it was barely heard. Good. The courthouse hallways were never quiet after recess, but today they were practically frozen. Lawyers whispered instead of argued. Reporters outside tapped frantically on phones, but kept their voices low. Even security officers stood a little taller, watching Emily and Max move through the corridor like something sacred had passed through. Emily's short note had spread beyond courtroom whispers. Though the document itself remained sealed, The idea of it that a child spoke to her dog before she could speak to anyone else resonated far beyond the trial. Online forums lit up. Child psychologists called it breakthrough behavior. Trauma specialists said Max was more than a comfort animal. He was a bridge to recovery. But inside Emily, the war hadn't ended. As she waited on a hallway bench for the next hearing to begin, her fingers gripped Max's leash tighter than usual. Max rested his head on her lap, occasionally looking up to check on her. Her eyes were dry, but her heartbeat was racing. She didn't understand everything about trials or judges, but she knew the monster who used to smile at her across the breakfast table was fighting to stay free. Karen Monroe leaned down beside her. "You don't have to go back in, honey. You've already done more than enough." Emily looked up at her, hesitated, then gave a subtle nod. She wanted to see it through. When the doors opened again, she walked inside with Max and took her place beside her mother. Lane was all ready, seated, eyes fixed downward, trying not to meet hers. Judge Hamilton entered moments later. He looked tired, not just from the proceedings, but from the weight of what the case had revealed. His eyes settled on Emily. For the first time, he didn't see a victim. He saw a survivor. "We are reconvened for further review of the psychological findings and to assess whether the defendant should face additional charges under federal abuse statutes," the judge announced. The prosecutor called their next witness, Dr. Leah Corbin, a trauma therapist who had been working with Emily behind closed doors for weeks. She was gentle, middle-aged, with a voice that somehow made even hard truths sound survivable. "Dr. Corbin, can you describe Emily's current psychological condition?" the prosecutor asked. "She has complex PTSD," Corbin replied. "What's remarkable is how intact her cognitive memory is. She remembers every detail." The trauma response, her silence, was her way of protecting herself and Max. But now, with support and consistent reassurance from Max, she's begun reclaiming her voice. And does she understand what's happening in court? Yes. Not every legal nuance, but she understands she's safe now, and that this process is part of keeping her safe. Corbin turned toward Emily gently. "And she wants to be heard, even without words." Karen stood again. "Your Honor, with permission, Emily would like to show something she's been working on in therapy." Judge Hamilton nodded, leaning forward. Emily stood slowly, pulled a small envelope from her hoodie, and handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. He opened it, and inside was a single drawing. It was childlike, but unmistakable. A man stood behind a closed door, angry. Lines scribbled around his head. In front of the door sat a girl, curled into a ball, eyes shut tight. But beside her stood a golden retriever, tall and proud, blocking the door with his body. There were no words, but none were needed. The judge turned the drawing around for the courtroom to see. The effect was instant. Even the court stenographer stopped typing for a moment, biting her lip to hold back tears. Gregory Lane shifted in his seat. He looked smaller than ever. "Do you recognize this scene, Mr. Lane?" the judge asked. Lane cleared his throat. "It's artistic exaggeration." Corbin shook her head. "It's memory." The prosecutor stood again. "Your Honor, we have new charges to submit to the court, supported by both physical evidence and expert testimony. We seek to add federal counts of aggravated child endangerment, unlawful confinement, and emotional torture." Hamilton didn't even blink. Motion granted. "Charges will be added to the docket." Lane stood suddenly. "This is outrageous. You're taking a dog's behavior and a child's drawing and building a case like it's fact." Karen Monroe turned toward him calmly. "We're building the case on your actions. The dog just saw what you thought no one else would." Max growled, not loud, just enough to remind Lane that Emily wasn't alone. The judge banged his gavel once. Order. The room settled again, but the tone had shifted. Lane's outburst had stripped away whatever mask of control he had left. His attempt to rattle the court had failed and made things worse. Emily sat down, and Max nestled into her side, tail gently wagging now. Her drawing now held up on. The evidence screen glowed like a quiet triumph. Judge Hamilton looked at the jury. We will resume tomorrow with closing arguments. The court thanks the child for her extraordinary courage, and the dog for being a better witness than most. People we see and hear. The courtroom laughed gently, not at Emily, but with a kind of reverence. Even Max looked like he understood. As court adjourned, Emily stood, walked to the door, then paused and looked back. Lane was watching her. She didn't flinch. She raised her hand slowly and gave Max the safe signal. This time, Max didn't growl. He simply sat at her side, strong and steady. Emily had taken back the power. The final day of the trial arrived with heavy skies and a restless wind sweeping through the courthouse steps. Reporters packed the sidewalk, whispering into microphones about the girl, her golden retriever, and the man who once fooled an entire neighborhood. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric, both tense and hopeful. Emily sat with Max beside her, calmer than she had been on any previous day. Something had shifted in her. She wasn't just enduring the trial now. She was owning it. Corinne Monroe reviewed her notes one last time, and rose for closing arguments. She began simply, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what we've witnessed these past weeks is not just the story of a criminal trial. It's the unveiling of a secret, one that was buried in silence, masked by charm and protected by fear. A fear so deep, a child stopped speaking. But a dog, a loyal, watchful, fiercely loving dog, didn't need her words to understand." Corinne paced slowly. "We have shown you journals, bruises, witness testimony, and a behavioral pattern that spans years. But we've also shown you courage from a little girl who never once accused Mr. Lane out loud, yet whose silence told us everything." She turned to Emily. Her first cry for help wasn't to a teacher or police officer. It was to Max, and Max heard her. Max responded, "Because sometimes animals recognize evil faster than people do." Turning back to the jury, her voice firmed. "This is not just about punishing a predator. It's about protecting every child who suffers in silence, waiting for anyone to believe them." She paused, eyes scanning the room. "Believe her." With that, she returned to her seat. The judge nodded. "Defense, your closing statement." Gregory Lane's lawyer, clearly rattled by the trial's turn, stood. "Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot allow emotion to override evidence. Yes, this child has endured trauma, and yes, her dog is impressive. But we must question, are we putting a man in prison based on a dog's growl and a child's drawing?" He gestured toward Lane. "Mr. Lane has no prior record. He is respected in his community. And these so-called journals? They are written in his hand, yes, but with no dates. No confirmations. Anyone can write something disturbing. That does not make them guilty." He stepped closer to the jury. "Sympathy is natural, especially when a child is involved. But sympathy should not replace proof. If you convict today, make sure it is because the law demands it, not your heart." He sat down, looking more defeated than confident. The judge gave his instructions to the jury and dismissed them to deliberate. As the jury filed out, Emily turned toward Corinne and whispered, "What if they don't believe me?" Corinne knelt down. "They already do. You are braver than any witness I've ever seen. And Max? He made sure no one ignored you again." The waiting room was silent. Time moved like molasses. Corinne paced. Emily sat cross-legged on the floor beside Max, eyes closed, fingers laced into his fur. Her mother sat nearby, whispering prayers, clutching a warm photo of Emily from years ago, before everything fell apart. The jury was gone for 2 hours. Then the knock came. "All rise," the bailiff called as the jury re-entered. Emily stood. Max stood too. The forewoman handed the folded paper to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. He opened it, took a breath, and read aloud, "We, the jury, find the defendant, Gregory Lane, guilty on all counts." A single gasp came from Emily's mother. Karen clenched her jaw to hold back tears. Emily didn't move. She was frozen, eyes wide, staring ahead. Then Max nudged her hand. Gently, she looked at him and smiled. The judge's voice echoed, "Sentencing will be held next week. Mr. Lane will be remanded into custody immediately, without bail." 2 guards stepped forward. Lane didn't fight. He didn't speak. His shoulders slumped as the cuffs clicked. Around his wrists, Emily watched him go, not with vengeance, not with anger, just closure. The courtroom emptied slowly, some still stunned by the emotional power of the trial. Reporters waited like hawks outside. But Emily wasn't interested in any of it. She stepped outside, into the sunlight that had finally broken through the clouds. The wind had calmed. Max walked beside her. A young reporter approached, microphone in hand. "Emily, just one question. What would you say to other kids going through what you did?" Emily didn't answer immediately. Instead, she knelt beside Max, hugged him tightly, and whispered something into his ear. Then she stood, looked the reporter in the eye, and said clearly, confidently, "Tell someone. Even if it's just your dog, someone will listen." The crowd went silent. Corinne Monroe stood back, watching with quiet pride. The girl who once trembled in a courtroom had found her voice in the most unexpected way. And beside her, always steady, always brave, was Max. The courthouse was quieter than usual the day of sentencing. The weight of the trial still lingered in every corner on the worn wooden benches, in the lingering eyes of court staff, and especially in the hearts of those who had watched Emily's journey. Emily entered with her mother and Max by her side. The golden retriever moved calmly, sensing the significance of the moment, yet steadfast in his quiet protection. Judge Hamilton took his seat, looking down at the case files, and then at the young girl and her dog before him. The courtroom held its breath. "Mr. Gregory Lane," the judge began, his voice steady and resolute, "this court has found you guilty of multiple charges related to child abuse, unlawful confinement, and emotional torture. The evidence you concealed and the years of harm inflicted upon Emily Reed have been laid bare." Lane, pale and defeated, kept his gaze fixed on the floor. Hamilton continued, "In light of the severity of these offenses, and to protect not only the victim but the community at large, I hereby sentence you to 25 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole only after 20 years. A collective intake of breath echoed around the courtroom. For many, it was justice long overdue. Emily, seated with Max at her feet, felt a quiet sense of relief wash over her. Though the path ahead was uncertain, this chapter was finally closing. After the formalities, the judge addressed Emily directly. "You have shown extraordinary bravery and resilience. I am recommending that Max be formally recognized for his role in this case and that you both receive lifelong support services." Corinne Monroe smiled warmly. "That's wonderful, Your Honor." Emily gave a small nod, then reached down to pet Max's head. He looked up at her with gentle, unwavering eyes, the kind that had seen her through the darkest nights. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, hoping for a statement. Emily's mother stepped forward, embracing her daughter protectively. A reporter called out, "Emily, do you have anything to say?" Emily took a deep breath. Max at her sighed. For the first time since the trial began, She spoke not in silence or signals, but in words. Thank you. To everyone who listened even when I couldn't speak. To Max, who was my voice when I had none. And to anyone out there who feels scared or alone, you are not forgotten. There is hope. Her voice, steady and clear, resonated across the quay. Plaza. The crowd fell silent, absorbing the power of her words. Over the following weeks, Emily and Max became symbols of courage and hope. Local news stations featured their story. Child advocacy groups invited Emily's mother to speak at conferences about the importance of trauma-informed care and service animals. Emily herself returned to therapy, this time with renewed confidence. The silence that had once shielded her now felt less like a prison and more like a promise of healing. Max remained at her side, his presence a constant reminder that sometimes the deepest communication is wordless, but never unheard. Judge Hamilton kept his promise. He introduced a new initiative in his jurisdiction, encouraging courts to consider trauma service animals as integral parts of the legal process, especially for vulnerable children. Months later, Emily and her mother moved to a new home, one filled with sunlight and laughter. Max had his own cozy corner, but he spent most of his days near Emily, watching over her like the guardian he had always been. One afternoon, as Emily played in the backyard, she paused and looked at Max. She smiled and tapped his shoulder twice, the old signal that once meant danger. Max wagged his tail and nudged her gently, as if saying, I'm here. Then Emily pressed her palm to his chest, signaling safe. Max settled down beside her, his golden fur gleaming in the afternoon sun. For Emily, the signals were no longer a call for help, but a language of trust, love, and survival. Her voice had returned, but Max would always be her first listener. And together, they had changed a courtroom and a life forever.